when horrible things are happening in the world, horror seems to have like a moment because people are seeing like all these awful things happening, and it's like they want to have like scares but in a controlled environment. It's almost like escapism.
I think what makes them so incredibly special is that they provide this really unique opportunity within film to discuss things that are very difficult to talk about often.
Horror movies are having a moment. It's the fastest growing genre in Hollywood. Films like Backrooms and Obsession have broken box office records and brought in millions. But the directors behind these films didn't go to Hollywood film schools and work their way up the career ladder. They learnt their craft on YouTube. And today you're going to hear why horror is booming in Hollywood and how YouTubers are reshaping the film industry. I'm Hannah, and this is What in the World from the BBC World Service. All right, guys, can we get the lights on now? We are speaking to our BBC horror reporter, Mel Ramsey, about this. Hey, Mel.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. To start off with, Mel, can you introduce yourself and just tell me a bit about your love of horror?
Yeah, I'm Mel Ramsey. I'm a senior journalist at BBC News, and I have loved horror since I was far too young to watch it. It is something that has followed me all the way through up until my age now. I love that horror is now getting the attention that it has always deserved. But yeah, I think horror, it's just something that I think when you're younger, you may see it as something that is like so terrifying and so scary. And obviously it can be, but I think I like to see the light in it. I like to see like the comedy aspect of it as well. So I think it's just such a fun, different kind of genre. There's nothing else like it. So I just love horror. It's the best.
I still find it scary. I still have to hide behind the sofa or cover my eyes or hug the person next to me when I'm watching a horror film and have lots of chocolate available.
I mean, that sounds great, but you need to push through, push through.
Horror is having its moment at the moment in Hollywood. We're seeing it, horror films winning more Oscars, breaking box office records. Why is it growing as a genre?
I think it depends who you ask, really. I think for some people, they will say that when horrible things are happening in the world, horror seems to have like a bit of like a moment because people are seeing like all these awful things happening, and it's like they want to have like scares but in a controlled environment. It's almost like escapism. But also I think that a lot of it has to do with, I'm going to say, algorithms. I think a lot of people are discovering new kind of genres and things like that through things like TikTok, through Instagram Reels, through YouTube Shorts. So a lot of people are seeing like these kind of content and being like, oh, that's interesting. And then the algorithm will serve them more and more. And especially with horror, you get these things like jump scares, etc. It gets your attention. So the more people are seeing things like that, the more they're then consuming more. And it opens up a whole new world of different things for them. So it could be the quite serious answer, but it could also be as simple as algorithms.
So that's where the appeal is coming for younger audiences in particular. But what about Hollywood itself? What about the industry?
Well, traditionally, the horror genre has been kind of snubbed at these big award ceremonies, which in the horror community, it's become almost kind of a meme. So recently, when we had things like 16 nominations for Sinners at the Oscars, which I believe is the most nominations for a film that has ever happened at the Oscars, which is just amazing. And then you had people like Amy Madigan winning Best Actress for Weapons. And then obviously things like The Substance with Demi Moore. So I feel like you're getting to a point now where horror is finally getting recognised as a legitimate art at the Oscars and at the Academy Awards, which is something that honestly I can't even stress enough how much of a joke this has become in the horror community. Like we just see it as they're never going to take horror seriously. It's just never going to be seen as that. But now people actually are giving it the flowers it deserves.
And horror today looks quite different from the slasher films that lots of us will have grown up with. What are some of the main themes of horror films? Do they come from internet culture too?
A lot of them do. So I think, as you pointed out there, like in the 80s, we had lots of slasher films. And then as it went to the 90s, we kind of still had that with a bit of Scream, etc. But now it's gone so like wild. Like you've got things like body horror. So I'm sure you heard about things like The Substance, which did incredibly well. And you've also got things like Teeth, which came out a few years ago, which is even more disturbing. And then like Together and things like that. So body horror is a really big one. But you've also got a lot of things like with technology. So I don't know if you heard about a movie called Host. It was done just through Zoom calls, very similar to this, but it was absolutely brilliant. So you've got things like that where it's technology. So things have moved on where rather than it being like a guy following you around with an axe, it's like things like themes. So like for example, Hereditary and the Babadook and things like that. The themes in that are like loss and trying to cope with like things like that, and even smile when it comes to like grief. So it's become like quite like deep, and it's so interesting to see how things have moved from just like a guy with an axe following you through a house to a point now where you're exploring themes of grief and death and mental illness and things like that. It's just such an interesting way to see the way things have gone.
And we know that lots of you are big fans of the film and of horror in general. So we wanted to hear from you about why you think horror is having such a big moment.
Hi, my name's Star Lily. I'm a huge horror fan from the UK, and I've loved horror for years now, and it is so good to see that so many people are loving the genre as well. One of the things that I love most about horror is just how fun they are, they're thrilling, and they do really keep me on the edge of my seat, which is exactly what I want in a film. And I also love its ability to embed other genres into the films. Also, it creates such memorable characters that again are deeply embedded into today's popular culture.
Why I love horror movies. Number one, spirituality. I've always been very curious about what lies on the other side, just kind of beyond the physical. The physical is kind of boring. Number two, the battle between good and evil. I'm a practicing Catholic, very strong Christian. There's always been this kind of battle between good and evil, and I always want to see good prevail. I guess also the mystery of it's in that overwhelming dawn of you understanding that we don't know everything in this world, and then horror movies kind of touch bits and bits of it. So yeah.
My name's India Isabel. I'm a film and TV content creator, journalist and podcaster living in London. I love horror movies for a multitude of reasons. I think they're really entertaining. I love how creative they can get. I also just love the feeling of being scared. But I think what makes them so incredibly special is that they provide this really unique opportunity within film to discuss things that are very difficult to talk about often. Horror presents an opportunity to explore those and discuss the way that those things make us feel without having to directly talk about them. You're able to use a monster or a ghost or a possession to represent something rather than having to name it directly.
Thank you so much for sending those in. So, Mel, why is it that horror in particular is the genre where so many YouTubers are having success and breaking into Hollywood?
I think I think a lot of people will say, oh, they've got loads of followers. But I think a really interesting thing is that back 10, 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted to make a movie, you'd have to get someone on board. You'd have to get like all these movie studios to really believe in you. And if you didn't have loads of things in your repertoire of like things you've done in the past, it'd be very difficult to break in. But if you're a YouTuber and you've got 1 million subscribers, 10 million, 40 million, you've already proved that the content that you make has an audience. So it makes it almost easier to be able to get people to get on side with you and be like, right, this is the content I make on. I mean, for example, Corey Barker, he did one called Milk and Cereal about 2 years ago. He made that with I think it was $800 budget, literally $800, and it was absolutely fantastic. I watched it maybe a year ago, and I was like, who is this guy? Like, this is so cool. And then when I heard that he was then directing Obsession, I was like, that makes so much sense, because it like he'd found that audience and people in the horror community. That's how I heard about it. People in the horror community were talking about it so much. So I feel like when these YouTubers are making this content, it's finding their audience, and then all of these horror communities are talking about it, spreads very quickly. And it's so refreshing now to see these new IPs, because I do feel like cinema became very monotonous. It was just like remake. Disney's going to do a live action remake. Do you know what I mean? It's because they were almost betting on the fact that these movies already had an audience to make this, like, rehash the same old content. But now they're betting on these YouTubers to have this audience to make fresh content.
And learning on the school of YouTube, right, is very different from going to film school. These YouTubers have different techniques, they have different ways of making content, and also they're engaging with their audiences in real time. How are some of these techniques changing what we're seeing coming out of Hollywood?
I think that's a really interesting point. I think, yes, they're not going to film school, but also they're not learning the same thing that everyone else is. So they're having to learn themselves. They're putting things out that are, I mean, Kane Parsons said that in our interview, he put it out completely authentically him. And if there's something there that isn't already there, you can make it. And then by looking at the analytics, you can see where people are dropping off, where people are really engaging, where people are rewatching. This kind of information is something that the film industry would be crying out for like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But these people are getting that as standard. They can see exactly where the drop off is. They can see what age is engaged in their content. So it's almost like in real time, they can adapt their content if they so wish to get the right kind of demographic that they're aiming for. But also it can just be as simple as I'm putting out what I want to put out, and whoever that resonates with, great.
And do you think that the success people like Carrie Barker, Kane Parsons, do you think that's encouraging more people to use the YouTube route into Hollywood?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when I was younger, if I was 20 years old and I saw one of my peers getting this kind of opportunity that Kane Parsons has, or like Corey Barker, for example, or the Filippo brothers, I didn't even mention them earlier about like Bring Her Back and Talk to Me. It's just such a cool thing to be able to see someone your age being able to be so successful. And that just says to people, well, I can do it as well, because these people, they didn't have all these crazy connections. They didn't have film school and things like that. They literally had a laptop, a camera, and then just the will to want to make something and put it out into the world. So I think we're going to see a lot more people realizing that being a director doesn't mean you have to be in your 40s, 50s, 60s and have all of these connections. You can literally be just someone in your bedroom and you can make something that resonates with people and reaches the correct audience.
YouTube's such a leveler, isn't it, like that?
It really is. I think we're going to see such exciting talent emerging over the next couple of years.
Mel, thank you so much for chatting to us. It's been great.
Thank you.
Before I go, I want to read out some comments from our episode on job hugging, which, if you don't know, it's the idea of staying put in a job because you don't want to take risks and hop from one job to another. And Philly left us a comment saying that companies just want more and more for less, and they recommend that you do the bare minimum. They say hard work just gets you more work. And then we got this comment from Giovanni, who said that they job hopped once but ended up going back to their old boss and has decided to stay put for a while. So whatever your views on jobs right now, please do keep those comments coming. That's all from me. I'm Hannah. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service, and we'll see you next time.